How many of you have had telepresence in your workplaces? Anyone yet? Wow. How many have lost your cubicles? Right. How many of you have seen what used to be called the email chain disappear? Things are changing in our workplaces, which is exactly what we're talking about here. Steelcase is a name I know because I'm old enough to know better, that I used to associate with a big metal desk stuck in the middle of the office. But today, your organization, as well as yours, are really rethinking how we work and where we work and how we get it done. Can you talk a little bit about the innovations that you've brought into our workplaces? And you'll start to see these things pop up in your workplaces.
Yeah, well, we've always been about trying to understand what goes on with human beings at work, and how they behave, and trying to understand if space can make a difference. And what we found in our research is that the physical spaces that we work in can actually shape human behavior. So that spaces give us cues about what's appropriate behavior and what's not.
Like what?
Well, like, for example, in this room, this room is communicating that you're in a listening mode and that everybody's sitting and looking forward. If one of you were to stand up right now, it would feel kind of weird. And so spaces will tell us that it's appropriate to do certain things or not do certain things. So when we think about where work might be going in the future, one of the things we're trying to understand is how do we create physical spaces that begin to impact some of the issues that we've been talking about this morning. People feeling a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, people feeling more engaged in their work.
And likewise, it's like, now you might have to explain to us the 20-second version of what your company does.
So Slack is a communication and collaboration tool for teams. It's kind of, people like to think of it as chat, but it's really where work gets done. You can communicate with other people on your team, you can communicate in group conversations, and you can also bring in a lot of other programs. I mean, I'm sure all of you are familiar if you work anywhere at all, the number of new things that your team is like, we can use this, and now we're using that, and engineering's using this, and finance is using this, and there's like this massive proliferation of tools that everyone's using. So Slack is a place not just to communicate and to signal, this is where we're doing work. It's also a place to bring in all of those tools and to kind of make it a platform for all the types of work that are being done. And it's, I think, best of all to me as a sociologist, ethnographer, like who loves to watch people work. We all have our hobbies. I know mine is a little weirder than most. But I think it's also a place to think about how not just work happens, but the culture of work and the culture at work happens, and you can see that unfold in a digital environment.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
I already know that I have an email chain that is like 3 miles long, sure. And am I not already getting enough communication in my workplace? Am I not hearing from enough people over here and over there and all day long? Do I really need more formats to do that?
So I think the thing about email is that email was, right, it's been around for 40 years, and it was never...
40 years of email.
I mean...
And I have that many in my queue, by the way.
I am, like, inbox 26,000 at all times, so trust me, you're not alone. I think
you think that's bad?
I mean, I'm just... don't want everyone to think I'm a monster. I think what's fascinating about email is that it was never intended to be a group collaboration or community. It was never about groups, right? Email's very traditional. It's one-to-one or one-to-many, which if you've been on a reply all chain that has spanned weeks, you know it's not about people chatting back and forth. And you also know when a lot of your emails are, hey, can you meet at 10? Well, I am only available from 11 to 12. And then someone else is like, yeah, but I have this thing. And then it's back and forth and back and forth. And it's those little bits. Or there's a lot of passive stuff that comes into email. You might be interested in this. Here's a newsletter, things you want to save for later. And it's not that Slack replaces email. It's that there are different forms of communication that we all do at work every single day, just like there are different types of work. And Slack is a way to think about transitioning into new forms of team communication and not making it just about all of this stuff gets dumped in your inbox. You have all of these emails. What do you do with them? Are you communicating with your team? Are you working in a team? Collaborating in any way.
So to go back to those videos, I mean, it is all in the same continuum, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's how do we think about, particularly as we look at more people working remotely, or even within the same physical work plants,
Sure.
how do we connect people with each other? And what does physical plant have to do with it? What does software have to do with it? How these things change?
Yeah, well, work is fundamentally a social endeavor. And if you think about the way work was designed, and I think Barry Schwartz was talking about this earlier, it was designed in this kind of Tayloristic way of breaking everything down into subsets and subtasks. And so that's the way the places that we worked were designed as well. And so, you know, we all lined up in little cubicles because work kind of just was process oriented and went from one person to the next. But if you think about the way the world is changing now and the way we need to work differently, you know, organizations and the people who work in them are looking for something fundamentally different. And the organizations are saying, you know, creativity is really a new imperative at work. We can't continue process work. Machine learning can begin to handle those things for us over time. But what we need is to create environments in which people can create. And so that's fundamentally a different way of working. And the reality is we're not always going to be able to be in one place at one time. So, you know, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is this kind of blended experience in which you have physical ways to connect and virtual ways to connect. Because fundamentally, to be able to do creative work, people need to be together.
I think also, in addition to that, you've probably all sat in a room where it was like a team building exercise or brainstorming. And you're looking around and you know 3 people out of 20, and nobody really wants to talk first, and nobody knows who's going on, and then it takes a long time to kind of build up to some engaging process, or maybe you have the first one, and then 2 or 3 later, you really start to pull some stuff out. And what's interesting about thinking about reorganizing and reorienting ourselves in the ways in which we work and communicate is, it's like if you've been on an email chain or in any of those meetings, and you're kind of like, who is Bob Schmidt? I have no idea who this guy is, but I'm supposed to talk about my work in email, or you're in this meeting and you're like, who's the guy down, you're whispering to your friend, you're like, who's the guy down the end on the other, right? And you're not sure who these people are. And in a different, when work starts to move out of this sort of highly structured, highly organized way that we've been doing it traditionally into things like Slack or into reorganized workspaces, you can see someone's face in various channels. You can look at their profile. What team are they on? Who do they work with? Where are they located? You probably have seen them in the cats channel because you are all in the cats channel like good human beings who should, you know, love cats. All of you do. But I mean in that way where it's like you see what people like and who they are, you see how they communicate. And so it doesn't, I think creativity comes also out of trust, out of learning to communicate, out of ways in which we are operating that we don't always operate at work right now, right? Not a lot of people work in industries where like, I want to share all my information. People are very guarded, right? People are very possessive and territorial in a lot of ways because there's a lot of fear about who are these people? What are they going to do with my information? And I think there's ways in which you open up communication and allow people to get to know who they're working with and why.
But you know, I think as a person who's been employed in a place that's lost its sort of traditional environments. So I worked in a place where first we lost offices, right? It didn't matter who you are, you lost your office. You are now part of the pool.
Sure.
And then it was, okay, then we don't want the cubicles because we're going to break down these walls. And it all seems sort of esoteric and kind of BS, right? But we're trying to understand what the corporate culture was telling us. And we read it as they're cheaping out on us. They don't want us to have offices anymore. They just want to dump us all together. We're all supposed to collaborate. And we're not quite buying it.
Right.
But give me
Yeah. Well,
let's be on that.
but some of that is true. I mean, some organizations were thinking about, you know, coming out of the recession, how do I cut costs? And can I reduce my real estate costs? And hey, maybe this is a great idea for doing that. So part of that is true, but the organizations that are more forward thinking, okay, are the ones that are saying, no, wait, I need to get my organization to behave fundamentally differently than it did before. I need agility, I need resilience, and I can't have people working alone in isolated little cubicles, perceiving that their work is all individual based or more process oriented. The more people become aware that they need to be working in a team-based environment, the more they begin to kind of redefine work and say, okay, well, maybe it's not about me being alone and just processing through my emails or whatever, that it's really about me coming together with other people to be able to create something new. The important thing when you get into that mode of work is to recognize that people fundamentally need to be with other people, but they also need time for solitude. And so where I think organizations have maybe misstepped is they've created these vastly open places where you feel like, you just can never be alone. You're constantly on and with other people. And so kind of more forward-thinking organizations are saying, okay, what if we created more of an ecosystem of spaces? And just like any healthy system in nature, it's biodiverse. So it's not all open. Some of it is enclosed. Some of it is relaxed and comfortable, and I can kick off my shoes and put up my feet. Some of it might feel more structured because that's what I need. All of it is going to need to be infused with technology. Not the kind of technology that makes our lives a pain in the neck because it won't work, but the kind of technology that actually becomes a participant with us. And so it can make things easier for us to get things done.
I mean, change is hard. Not everyone loves, when I was a little kid, my parents nicknamed me status quo because I hated change very much, right? No, it's hard, nobody wants, and this is my grandfather's 25-year anniversary watch, 1972. He was a liquor salesman from Hiram Walker, right? And that's changed. We're not all getting nice Hamilton watches on our 25th, and we're probably not all working for the same place for 25 years.
And I would also suggest to you that 25-year-olds probably don't have watches anymore.
Right, exactly, right. I mean, but I think there's a lot of ways in which things changed, and they have changed over time. Like you said, email came in, that was a change. And there's a lot of, I think part of the problem with change is not just that it's hard, and there's always a lot of changes happening. I talk to people, I'm fortunate to get to sit with people and in their offices, watch them work, listen, talk to them, and hear what's happening. And these people tell me, as I'm sure you're all familiar, about countless reorgs, restructurings, all these new tools being introduced. People are tired of change. And I think it's also a matter of when you change, you can't just say, well, we used to do it this way and we have this new tool, so we're going to use this tool the way that we used the last tool, because then at least we're not doing all of the change. And then the new tool doesn't really work, so you get frustrated, and then you're kind of like, well, now we need a different tool. Because what you're changing is, technology. I'm not a technological determinist. I don't think technology determines our culture. I think it's very back and forth. Culture and technology have to work together. So if you change a tool, if you change a system, if you change an environment, you can't just do what you did in email in Slack. You have to think about, what is this tool? What is this environment? Mm-hmm. If we're all sitting in this environment, or this, whether it's digital or physical, doing the same thing we did before, is that the kind of change we need? And those sorts of changes, the ones I'm talking about, they're harder, in part because we have to understand more of the root of the problem. Like, what's going on? Why are we working in this particular way? What's not actually happening? Or what are we trying to do? And how do we untangle that so we can get to the end of that thread, rather than, well, we don't really know what the problem is. We just know we get a lot of email. Well, why do you get a lot of email?
And it might happen in an evolutionary kind of
Sure.
way. I mean, I suppose that there are environments where we start thinking, oh, well, openness would be good because we have collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk to each other because we have to talk to each other because I'm sitting right there looking at you. And then that next iteration is, but holy cow, there's some days that I just need to concentrate on what I'm writing, and you are in my face, and I need not to have that. And then we have another iteration of that. And really, I mean, there's actually a science to watching this, to figuring out what people need.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we, much like Leah, we use ethnography and the social sciences all the time to kind of observe what happens at work. Because when you ask people how they behave, they can only tell you what they know or what they're comfortable telling you. But when you observe them, you can see things that are really different. And then you can begin to ask questions like, well, why is that happening? Why is that guy stacking a bunch of boxes outside of his desk in the open environment? And then when you begin to probe a little bit, you go, oh, he needed a little bit of visual privacy because he was getting distracted. Human beings are very distractible. we just were created that way.
Is this going to change, though, who I'm going to hire? I mentioned to you earlier, there was a person that had come into my workplace, and we were all really interested in hiring this woman. Sure. But we have a big open workplace, and someone finally said, but nobody's going to want to work with her because nobody's going to want to sit next to her because she's so darn loud, right? And she'll be on the phone. I mean, who wants to sit next to that person? So, there was actually a moment where we thought, do we really want this woman to come and work? Even though we feel that from her skills standpoint and everything else, she'd be great. But physically, that's going to change my workplace a lot, or I'm going to have to make a specific decision to say, but I need her to go work in the back of the room where no one else is.
Or you are empowered to make a decision to say, you know what, that's somebody that today I have the energy to be around that person, and tomorrow, I'm going to choose someplace else. And one of the things that we've found through our research is that the people who are most engaged at work are the ones who feel like they've got some control over their work experience, like they can choose where to go based on what they need to do, if they're an introvert or an extrovert, or just the mood or the energy level that you're in. So if I'm empowered to do that, it doesn't mean that you don't hire people. I mean, I think that's more of, is that person a good cultural fit for the organization? But it means that as an employee, I don't feel like I'm stuck next to the loud talker or the person who eats a strong smelling lunch or whatever it is that bugs me about somebody else in my workplace. If I'm empowered to choose and I'm treated like a grown-up at work, then I can go to other places where I can get done what I need to get done.
And that term, that cultural fit thing, though, that can be problematic.
Sure. I mean, cultural fit has been used a lot to not hire people for, a lot of unfortunate, I think part of empathy, there's there's different kinds of empathy, there's cognitive and emotional. And part of empathy is that it's easier to empathize with people who are similar to you, right? At least, it always is. That's the easiest leap. And so part of it is culture fit comes around, well, I immediately empathize with this person and it's not a push for me. So I surround myself with, that's why a lot of teams look very similar in terms of their demographics. But I think that culture fit, I think it's about, one of the things that's really interesting is that as we think about culture fit and we think about culture in the workplace, being able to connect in new and different ways allows us to see what is actually going on in the culture, right? It's, people talk a lot about transparency, and there's certainly the transparency of the information, the work that you're doing with something like Slack. It's like, if you have email, you've all been at jobs where you either joined and you were greeted with an empty inbox and you had to figure out how to learn about your workplace, how people communicate, what anything is going on at your job. Or you've had people who have left and a lot of information was locked right in their email that you now can't access. And so how do you sort of so that there's the transparency of information that lives on in Slack as the work that gets done. But there's also the idea of transparency around culture and cultural issues and the ways in which you can start to see how people communicate both in the physical, in the sort of your physical presence, but also in communication with one another. And you can also start to form groups that you may not have formed before. Like, I know there are lots of times where, women, there are Slack channels, there are private Slack channels, women, people of color, LGBTQ, people who can start to say, I thought I was crazy because every time I have that meeting, I feel like someone talks down to me, but I thought maybe it was just me. And those ways in which you can start to surface some of the cultural issues that define culture fit and and push at the edges of those rather than
and create new community.
Right, create new community, but also create how do you then use that to affect culture change so that culture fit doesn't mean what it always did, right? Like if nobody's talking about it, does it happen? We don't know. If I think I'm the only one experiencing it, how do I connect with someone? Am I whispering in the bathroom? Or are we talking more openly? Are we able to say culture does have to change because people are being asked to bring their whole selves to work, right? That's something you hear a lot, right? We want you to bring your whole self to work. We want you to really engage, which, that is a lot to ask of a person. And also, you probably don't want my whole self at work. Let me be really frank with you. But I think that's part of the thing is how do we give people the environment to feel more comfortable with what we're asking them to do work-wise?
Right, and
You know, I was just going to build on that by saying, you know, transparency is, it is critically important. And one of the things that we're experimenting with now is radical transparency at kind of a leadership level, where we took leaders out of space higher up on higher floors, brought them right down into kind of the main traffic flow. Nobody has like a big private office anymore. Everybody's in spaces where they have an ecosystem, so they can have privacy when they need it, but they can be open when they need to be seen. And I think it's that cumulative effect of just being very open, whether it's, you know, virtually or physically, that begins to communicate to people, hey, we're different. We're going to start working differently around here. We're going to build trust, and we're going to just build a very different way of working.
Well, we will see how our workplace changes and how much space we get to have, and I'm going to keep that loud woman away from the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.